NATO is accepting Finland. Finland is officially becoming the member of the North Atlantic Alliance. First of all, I wanted to ask you how Finland is going to benefit from that.
Well, Finland is going to be finally in a family of nations, of allies who are committed to the defense of one another. They have been, as you know, certainly since the end of World War II, they have been on their own. They have been non-aligned, they've been neutral, they've described themselves in different ways, and they've had to live right up against the Soviet Union and then Russia, and they've had to tread a relationship with Russia where they weren't quite always free to do what they wanted to do because they had to pay attention to the bear next door. And when you're alone and you've had wars with them before, that's a very uneasy existence, always having to look over your shoulder. Finland has now come in from the cold, if you will. They, of course, have been part of NATO through the Partnership for Peace for many years. They've worked with a lot of the allies since the end of the Cold War. So we all know each other, but they never had the Article 5 security guarantee. And now they do. And when you're used to being by yourself, suddenly being a member of a family and being able to look across the border with confidence at a country that has become crazy and lost its mind, I think that's a great benefit and a great comfort. And now Helsinki and the Finnish people are able to feel secure.
Jim, how is NATO benefiting from accepting Finland to its family, as you said?
Well, there's a couple of reasons on what NATO brings. They bring two big things. One is a very competent and professional military that is, as far as I can tell, pretty interrelated and interoperable with NATO forces, with NATO allies. They've been exercising and training for a long time. They use Western style equipment. They just bought the F-35 a few months ago. They have fought the Russians before, so they know how that is, and so they've also can bring a reserve capability that not a lot of nations have. A lot of nations have a reserve system. They call up their reservists every now and then. Well, the Finns take that seriously because when you're neutral, when you're not aligned, and you have to depend on yourself, you've got to have a very strong and competent reserve system, which they have. So one thing that a lot of people don't know is that if the Finns find themselves in trouble and they need to expand the size of their armies, they can do that pretty quick through a very good reserve system. But so that's one thing that they bring. The second thing they bring happens at NATO headquarters. They will help NATO work better in Brussels as a headquarters because they bring to the NATO table a pragmatic view of the world. They know how to get things done. They want to get things done. They're not going to bring drama and they're not going to bring theatrics to be thrown on the alliance when they're upset about something. They're going to come in with a knowledge of how to work in an international institution. They're going to come in with the savvy and the smarts that they have. And when you couple that with Sweden, both of those countries will help us do a better job thinking through problems and deciding what to do about issues by their presence around the table. And so I think we're all looking forward to that.
Jim, since you mentioned Sweden, is it imminent for Sweden to become the member as well?
Well, I'm not sure it's imminent, but I think it's going to happen. I think your listeners should know that they are working through these issues, these final issues with Turkey. The Turks certainly have a concern about terrorism, and they've got concerns about how Sweden is a bit more generous to some people than the Turks would like them to be. And so they've got to work something out. I would say that Sweden has already made a lot of changes legally and in other ways to show that they're going to be tough on terrorists and terrorist suspects. So we'll have to see what happens. I'm looking forward to the Turkish president's election, the re-election campaign that's going to end up in May. to have an election. I'm looking forward to that getting out of the way because I'm sure presidential politics, electoral politics play a role in this too. So let's let the Turks and the Swedes talk. Let's get the politics out of the way, and then I'm hoping at least by the summit in Vilnius, the Swedes will be alongside the Finns, and the alliance can move on into a whole new era with these two new members.
Jim, now the big question is how Finland's membership in the alliance will change the security landscape for Russia. We know that with Finland joining, the border of NATO and Russia is almost doubling. How do you think it's gonna be perceived and change the calculus in Moscow, if at all?
Well, it'll change it quite a bit. And it's not so much the border with Russia that is of great concern to me. I think the Finns have, for many years, guarded that border very well, and they know how to handle whatever might be coming their way. I think what's happened in terms of power shifts involves the Russians, and the fact that now on their northern flank, the northwestern flank. The nations up there are all members of NATO. It's no longer just 3 members, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland, with the Balts as well, and Poland and Germany. They're all now in the alliance. It used to be Sweden and Finland being neutral. That kind of gave some comfort, if you will, to the Russian planners, because they could feel that no matter what might happen up in that part of the world, those two nations would not be involved, and that they could be used however the Russian military might want to use their airspace, or Gotland Island off of Sweden, or whatever it might be. They felt that they could act with impunity up there. They wouldn't have to worry about the response from those two nations, because they were neutral and they were not a part of the alliance. So this was something that gave the Russians a little bit of leverage up in that area. That leverage is gone now. And so if you look at a map and you look at that northwestern flank, it's all painted NATO blue. And you will notice, too, that blue extends pretty close up to the Kola Peninsula, which is where the Russians have their northern fleet. They've got a lot of important strategic elements up there, one of which is their nuclear second strike capability, which is, their submarine-launched ballistic missile capability. Those submarines are up there. It's naval aviation, backfire bear bombers are up there. They can carry nuclear weapons. You've got, the surface fleet too, who now will be having hypersonic missiles. So the bastion up there, the Russian bastion of the Northern Fleet, is very sensitive, very important. And now they've got NATO breathing down their neck. So I think for a Russian planner, or for Putin himself, the map has changed, and the map has them locked up in terms of having a lot of NATO nations in that area. But I think the point should be made that this means, to me at least, I'm not sure what the Russians feel, but to me this is a more stable area now. This is NATO up there. NATO is predictable. NATO brings stability. NATO doesn't bring threat with it. NATO brings nations in an alliance whose dedication is for defense, is to deter, not to attack. If the Russians are paranoid, if the Russians look on NATO as a threat, as an enemy, they might have a different view, but that's their problem. We all know in the West, and these two countries that have just joined, Sweden and Finland, they know that their role is to defend the alliance, to deter threats. They're not there to cross that border from Finland into Russia. They're not there to be something that's going to be threatening to Russia. That's just not what's going to happen. So for me, that brings stability. For Russia, they might look on it differently.
Jim, so we know that when politics become heated, a lot of things depend on perception. And this is just following up on the question of this threat perception in Russia. Lately, we heard that Russia is sending tactical nukes to Belarus. This is all in development now. Belarus president is in Moscow as we speak. And this is all kind of complicating the calculus, I suppose, for international security. How are you viewing this? And does it really mean that NATO expanding might, because of the Russian perception, lead to further escalation, as they just recently warned in Moscow?
No, I think, I mean, you're absolutely right that these things are happening. But the way I look on it is, in terms of the nuclear weapons, so to speak, the tactical nuclear weapons going to Belarus, I think what they're going to do is send in Iskander launchers, which have a conventional and nuclear side. So I'm not sure if actual nuclear warheads and nuclear materials have been transferred to Belarus. And I think Putin said it's going to remain under Russian control, this kind of thing. I mean, he said this is what the U.S. does. I mean, it's just, but I think really what he ends up doing, we'll just have to wait and see. But I think what he's in saying all of this right now, he's trying to make the case that he's trying to scare the West. These examples of rattling the nuclear saber is trying to make everyone afraid, just trying to make everyone put pressure on their governments not to support Ukraine. It's all disinformation, it's scare tactics, and it's wrong. And I think the West by now knows that. I don't think this is helping to scare anyone. We know that what Putin is saying and what Belarus is doing is stuff we've heard before. We'll just see what they end up doing. But I don't think that anyone should look on the Russian-Belarusian relationship or military moves by Russia into Belarus as something to be afraid of, particularly if you're a NATO ally, and everyone around them are NATO allies now. So I think that this is just a part of a PSYOPs campaign, if you will, psychological operations campaign that the Russians are running to try to mess with the West, and it's just not going to work.
Jim Stoltenberg, on the occasion of Finland joining NATO, also emphasized that the future of Ukraine is in NATO, but that the Russian invasion into Ukraine is complicating this issue. How do you yourself see the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO in the foreseeable future, in the distant future, if it's possible to predict anything at all at this point?
Well, I've long ago left predicting, so I can hide behind that and not answer your question. But I think I like Stoltenberg said. I think he's probably said it well, that I think the NATO is in Ukraine's future, but it's obviously complicated by Russia, and that's complicated by what Russia is going to look like when this fighting ends. I think what we have to think about are the steps towards NATO that need to be taken now, and one of them has got to be to get this war over with. There's a lot of fighting going on that's going to be happening in the spring. There's going to be a Ukraine offensive. It's going to be tough going up against dug-in Russian forces. We don't know what the outcome is going to be, but we know that the West has, and the U.S. particularly over the last couple of days, have picked up a lot of resupply of the kinds of equipment you need when you're on the offensive. So we know that's going to happen. We'll have to see where that goes. So we need to be dealing with that. We need to be thinking too about what can we do in the interregnum before a possible NATO membership to give Ukraine what it needs to always be able to defend itself against Russia. Because even if this war ends and there's some kind of armistice or whatever it looks like, Russia is going to be just biding its time and waiting to go back into Ukraine. That's going to have to be our planning assumption. So we need to be thinking now, what can we be doing when the war finally ends to make sure we don't go back to business as usual, as if the world has not changed. The world has. And we're going to have to help Ukraine be as integrated and as strong as the strongest NATO member. And we're going to have to work on some security guarantees too. How will that work? Security guarantees are only as good as the nations and the good faith of those nations and the capability of those nations and the political will of those nations to back up that guarantee. We know that didn't happen for Ukraine. The Budapest Memorandum was not backed up at all. So we've got some hard thinking and hard decisions to make to take care of Ukraine once that fighting ends, and then we'll see where we are with NATO. But I don't want us to jump ahead into things. I want us to deal with the fighting at hand. And so let's stay focused on resupply. Let's stay focused on training. Let's stay focused on providing modern tanks, which are beginning to roll in, and armored personnel carriers and this type of thing. We need to keep that going and get this offensive underway. And then let's talk about NATO when we're ready to talk about NATO.
Jim, talking about the offensive, it was just announced that the U.S. is given another package of military aid, $2.6 billion. Is it in preparation for the offensive exactly? What do we know about it?
Well, it is. I mean, a lot of it is a lot of ammo in there, which is good, because if you're on the offensive, you use a lot of ammo. So it's all kinds of ammo. There was a lot of fuel trucks there as well. And these tanks need fuel all the time. Whether it's an Abrams or whatever tank, they've got to have fuel to move along with them as they move on the offensive. So that certainly was a sign of that as well. There were other bits of equipment in there that you need on an offensive. You have to be able to pull up landmines. And there's a lot of other things that you've got to do. And I think in that U.S. package, there was a lot of that, and allies are providing that too. So I just wish we had done this 6 months ago, but we are where we are. So let's get that flow going, and then let's see this offensive kicked off. But I think we're giving them what they need, and in the middle of the offensive, we'll need to be doing this too. It's not one and done. It's going to have to be continuing, if not increased, once that offensive starts.
What are you anticipating? I know you said it's impossible to predict, but in terms of the timeline in the next few months, do you see things heating up by the summer, by the fall? Do we know anything about that?
Well, we don't know anything official, but I will say that we can't start the offensive until we're ready. You don't want to go off half-cocked, as we say. We've got to be able to go in with what we need to go in with. But we know that the longer we wait, the more the Russians will be dug in, and the more Russian reinforcements will arrive, and the stronger the Russian defense will be. So we can't wait forever. And so I would say something will hopefully happen sooner rather than later. But anything more specific than that is I'll leave that to someone else.